He had told her he had no standing. Those were the words he used on a Tuesday morning in March, before he put on his hat and walked away down a London street and did not look back. Eleanor Voss had stood in the doorway and had not, in the moment or in the 4 days since, found anything to disagree with. She was reconsidering this now. The hired carriage rattled through Berkshire with her papers in her lap and a sky above the bare elms that had not decided what color it intended to be. March, still. Cold with the particular patience of a season that is not in a hurry. She had received Richard's letter on Thursday morning. 4 lines. The Fallow matter required her presence at the Ashworth estate for a preliminary discussion with the creditor's representative. Saturday, if she could manage it. Mr. Graves at the Chartered Bank had been contacted and had confirmed his cooperation. The letter had not mentioned Edmund. She understood the omission the moment the carriage rounded the final curve, and she saw him standing outside the stable dark coat, hat in hand, the posture of a man who has been where he is for some time and is not performing patience so much as simply having it. He saw the carriage before the groom did. He straightened, not quickly, just enough. Eleanor looked at him through the window glass. She had perhaps 4 seconds before the door opened. She used them to decide what expression she was going to wear. She settled on composed.
Mr. Ashworth?
Miss Voss.
He offered his hand as she stepped down. She took it for exactly as long as was required and released it. The grip was steady. She noted this and did not yet know what to do with the information.
I was not told you would be here.
I was not told you would be here either.
He said this plainly, not as apology, not as complaint, but as a fact worth establishing before anything else was established. That Richard had arranged this without informing either of them was noted by both and left unspoken. They had other things to discuss. Eleanor straightened her gloves and walked toward the door. Richard met them in the entrance hall, or rather he met Eleanor in the entrance hall, with the careful warmth of a man who is trying to be gracious and finding it requires more effort than it once did. He thanked her for making the journey. Fallow's representative would arrive Sunday morning. The house was at her disposal. Supper at 7. He looked at Edmund the way you look at furniture you have not yet decided whether to rearrange. Edmund looked back at him with the expression of someone long accustomed to this and no longer surprised by it. Eleanor observed them both and said nothing. The house was large enough that 3 people could arrange themselves at a comfortable distance with moderate effort, and for the remainder of Saturday afternoon, this is largely what happened. Eleanor was shown to a sitting room in the east wing. She arranged her papers, ordered tea she did not drink, and began reviewing the terms. She had been working for perhaps 2 hours when the knock came. Edmund, with a file under one arm and the posture of a man about to ask something he suspects may be unwelcome.
I have the restructuring model Graves outlined. I thought it might be worth comparing notes before Sunday.
You spoke with Mr. Graves directly.
By letter. Last week, he was thorough.
Eleanor looked at him for a moment. She had not planned to work with anyone tonight. She had planned to work alone, to prepare her position to arrive at Sunday's meeting contained and precise. She moved her papers to make room at the desk. This did not surprise her, in retrospect. He sat. He opened the file. He did not comment on the fact that she had made room without saying she would. She noticed that he did not comment on it. They worked. The fire burned lower, and neither of them called for coal. Their notes accumulated beside each other on the desk, her handwriting and his, different in every visible quality, arriving at the same conclusions by different roads. She had begun to find this more interesting than she had originally intended to. By the time the room had gone genuinely cold, they had found it. A clause in Fallow's original terms that created a deliberate ambiguity when read alongside the bank's standard restructuring guidelines, a contradiction that was not an oversight. Edmund found the clause first. 3 minutes later, from a different document, Eleanor arrived at the same corner of the problem without knowing he was already there. She held the page toward him to show him. He leaned over to read it, close enough that she was aware of him in the particular way that has nothing to do with documents, and read it. He straightened.
He built this in deliberately.
Yes.
He wanted room to adjust, to maneuver, depending on what we presented.
He always wants room. The question is whether the room he left himself becomes a liability when we make the alternative clear enough.
It does. If Graves presents the restructuring as the better arithmetic for Fallow's own exposure, if Fallow understands the ambiguity becomes something he cannot control the moment it is examined.
Then he restructures without being asked twice.
Eleanor sat back. The fire was nearly out. The Berkshire dark was complete outside the window. No moon yet, the kind of quiet that settles over country houses when the day has given up. She said, "If this works, and I believe it will work, your brother will not know who found it." Not initially. Edmund looked at her.
He will know eventually.
Eventually is not Sunday.
Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile, the consideration of one arriving at the edge of his face and declining to commit. She had not seen anything close to it before and found herself marking it, the way you mark a small unexpected thing you have not yet placed. If you are enjoying this, leave a like, or drop a comment telling me where you are listening from. It is a small thing, but it helps the platform understand this kind of story is worth finding. She stayed in the East Wing sitting room through supper, which a footman brought to her on a tray, and continued working through the first hour of the evening. It was Edmund who noticed the fire had died. She heard the door, looked up, and found him with a scuttle of coal in a manner entirely unsuited to his coat.
That is not your job, Mr. Ashworth.
No. But the footmen are at supper, and you have been in here since 5 o'clock.
He crouched and added coal to the grate with the practiced ease of someone who has done this himself before. She watched him and said nothing. He did not leave when he stood. He sat in the other chair, near the fire, and she found, to her own mild surprise, that she did not mind.
How is it between you and Richard tonight?
Quiet. Better than quiet. Possibly. He is thinking.
That is better.
For Richard, thinking requires him to be still, and being still means not filling the room with decisions. So yes, better.
Eleanor set down her pen. The fire had caught properly. The room was warmer already, which was more than she had been willing to admit she needed.
He is not a bad person.
No, he is a man who mistakes certainty for character. He has always been that. It is easier in some situations than others.
And you? Do you mistake certainty for character?
Edmund looked at the fire, a long beat.
I have a different failing. I'm too certain about what I do not deserve to have.
He said it in the tone of someone describing a fact about the weather, accurate, unornamented, not inviting argument. She did not argue with it. She did not entirely agree with it either, but she put that away, neatly, alongside several other things she had been putting away for the better part of 4 days. He stood.
Sleep well, Miss Voss.
She said goodnight. He left. The fire burned steadily. She did not immediately pick up her pen. Sunday arrived with the crispness of a day that has decided to be clear. Eleanor was up before 7. She dressed carefully. She had learned, over a year attached to this family's name, that the manner of a woman's presentation in rooms like this one carries weight that has nothing to do with fashion, and went downstairs. Edmund was already in the breakfast room. He had been there long enough to have finished 1 cup. He stood when she came in. They sat across from each other without arranging it. The papers were still there. She had brought hers down. He had brought his, and they settled into the quiet that comes between people who have learned the rhythms of the other. She poured her tea. He corrected a figure in the margin of his notes. She adjusted a reference in hers. Neither of them spoke for the first 10 minutes, and this required no effort from either of them, which was itself a thing worth noticing. Richard appeared in the doorway at 8:30. He stopped. He looked at the table. The papers spread between them. Eleanor's handwriting in the margin of one document, Edmund's corrections alongside hers in another, the Graves letter lying open beside the teapot, 2 cups half drunk. He stood in the doorway for 3 seconds. Then he sat down.
How long?
Edmund glanced at Eleanor once, briefly. She gave him nothing.
Since Wednesday.
Richard poured his tea with the deliberate movements of someone buying himself a moment and using the tea as cover for it. He set the pot down.
You went to her, without telling me.
Edmund met his eyes.
She had the bank connections and the legal framework. I had the financial analysis. The problem was too large for one person and too urgent for delay.
Practical. That is your word for it.
Eleanor set down her cup.
Richard, what Edmund has described is accurate. We divided the problem because it needed to be divided, because the timeline you created left no room for a more orderly arrangement. If you are angry with him for proceeding, I would suggest directing some portion of that toward the conditions that made it necessary.
The room was very quiet. Richard looked at her. He looked at Edmund. He stood and left without speaking. They heard his footsteps cross the hall, a door, then silence of the kind that has weight to it. Edmund was still watching the door. Eleanor watched Edmund.
He will come back.
Yes.
Is it always like this between you?
A pause with shape to it.
It was not always.
What changed it?
He looked at the window. The Berkshire morning was unhelpfully bright.
4 years ago, Richard had a smaller debt, different clubs, the same pattern. I became aware of it before he was ready to address it. I settled it quietly, spoke to the relevant creditor, arranged a transfer, and did not tell Richard.
He found out.
A year later, by accident, the man I had spoken to made a reference in passing at a dinner. Richard heard it.
And he interpreted it as
a younger brother managing an older brother's failure without permission. Condescension wearing the mask of generosity, which was not wrong precisely. It simply was not what I intended.
There is a particular category of mistake that looks like kindness from the inside and like something else entirely from the outside. She had been engaged to a man who made it in a ballroom in front of the Pemberton Assembly. She was now sitting across from his brother, who had made a quieter version of the same mistake 4 years earlier, and had been paying for it ever since in a currency that had no agreed name.
Did you tell him what you had intended?
No.
Why not?
He was quiet long enough that the question had time to settle into the room.
By the time I understood how he had taken it, it had become a thing we did not discuss, and we are both in our different ways very capable of not discussing things.
Eleanor looked at him. He was looking at the window, and the line of his expression was the line of a man who has arrived at an accurate assessment of himself and finds it neither surprising nor comfortable. She refilled his tea, he noticed. Neither of them said anything about it. They sat in the morning light with the papers between them and the work still ahead. Richard came back at 9:30. He did not sit. He stood near the fireplace with the posture of someone who has done something with the last hour walked, or stood at a window somewhere, working through an argument until it became too heavy to carry alone. He said to Edmund, "I know why you did it. Then, and now?" Both times. Edmund said nothing. Richard said, "That does not mean I find it simple." Edmund said, "I know." 3 sentences between them. The words were small. The weight they carried was not. Eleanor watched them and understood that this was the most direct exchange they had managed in 4 years, and that it was happening in her presence, not by accident. She had been placed in this house by someone who had concluded, at some point between Thursday and Saturday, that the presence of a neutral party might make certain things possible that would otherwise remain suspended. Richard was smarter, she thought, than he generally allowed people to see. He reached into his coat and placed a letter on the table. He said, This arrived yesterday evening. Eleanor read it first, then Edmund, then Eleanor read it again. Fallow was prepared to restructure. The terms were close to what she and Edmund had projected, in several places more favorable than they had expected to win. The analysis had worked. There was one condition. Fallow required a personal guarantee from an individual outside the Ashworth family. A signature, on record, attesting to the good faith of the restructuring arrangement. Someone with established standing in the financial community and no direct interest in the outcome. Eleanor set the letter down. She understood what she was reading and what it would cost: her name, her father's name, his connections at the chartered bank, his reputation in the rooms where these things were decided, inherited, and preserved carefully since his death. Attached to an Ashworth debt, in a document she could not retrieve, for however long such documents were kept. The precise exposure she had spent the past year managing quietly to avoid. She understood something else as well. Fallow had known what he was asking when he wrote it. Men who operated as Fallow did always knew. Edmund spoke.
You do not have to.
I know.
He looked at her.
Eleanor?
I said I know.
She said it evenly, not unkindly. The way you say something when the decision is already made, and what remains is simply time. She looked at Richard.
I'm going to sign it. I want to be clear that I'm not doing this because anything is owed. I'm doing it because it is the right resolution to a problem I chose to be part of.
Richard looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression clarified, the look of someone who has revised his understanding several times in the past 12 hours and has arrived, finally, at something he did not expect to feel.
I know.
For the first time since she had arrived at this house, she believed him. Fallow's representative, a careful man named Stanton, with the measured manner of someone who makes his living being precise on behalf of people who prefer not to be accountable, arrived at 10 o'clock. He reviewed the documents twice. He asked 4 questions in the tone of someone who had not expected to find the presentation this thorough, and was adjusting his assumptions accordingly. Edmund presented the restructuring model. Eleanor presented the bank framework and the clause analysis. She watched Stanton process each document and recognized, from her father's business dealings, the exact moment when a man decides he is not going to find anything better. He drew the guarantee form across the table. Eleanor signed it. Her hand was entirely steady. She had not known until that moment whether it would be. Stanton expressed the appropriate thanks and left at noon. Richard saw him to the door. Edmund and Eleanor were left in the room with the cleared table and the particular quiet of something that is finished. Edmund began gathering the papers with the efficient movements of someone who does things with his hands when he is not certain what to do with everything else. Eleanor watched him. She had spent 4 days treating this as a problem, a set of terms to be negotiated, a clause to be found, a signature to be obtained. That had been practical, that had been necessary. She was not certain it had been entirely honest. She said his name. He looked up. She found, when he did, that she did not have a specific thing to say after it. She had simply wanted him to stop moving for a moment. He stopped. The afternoon light through the windows had shifted, past noon, the quality of early afternoon that makes rooms feel both more real and more temporary. She could hear Richard somewhere distant in the house, his footsteps measured and even.
Tell me something that has nothing to do with any of this.
He looked at her steadily. She could see him decide whether she meant it.
I mean it. Something else.
A pause.
I have a house in Wiltshire. Very small. I prefer it considerably to this one.
Why?
It has no history I did not choose. I found it on a road I happened to be on, and I bought it before I had thought carefully about whether it was sensible. Nobody had expected me to want it.
Is that what you're best at? choosing things nobody expected you to want.
He was quiet in the way she had come to read as him arriving somewhere true.
Occasionally. Not as often as I would like.
Eleanor nodded. Outside, a cloud moved. The room shifted the way rooms do when the light changes, everything the same, something altered. She was aware, with a clarity she had not chosen, that she had stopped thinking of Edmund Ashworth as an ally, as a variable in an arrangement she had entered, as a problem to be managed alongside the one they had just solved. She was not sure precisely when this had happened. She was fairly certain it had happened before Sunday. She was also fairly certain she had been pretending not to notice. This was, she thought, not her most efficient piece of self-management. Richard returned from seeing Stanton out and stood for a moment in the doorway. He looked at them, Eleanor sitting, Edmund standing with the half-gathered papers, the quality of a conversation that had been happening before he arrived and had paused for him without effort. Something moved in his expression, the look of someone who has been revising his understanding all morning and has just found one more thing to revise. He said to Eleanor, "I will write to you Tuesday. If Fallow holds to the terms, we should be clear by the end of the month." Eleanor said that would be fine. Richard looked at Edmund. It lasted only a moment. It contained more than a moment could reasonably hold. Edmund received it without flinching. Then Richard said, "The roads will be difficult by late afternoon. You should both stay the night." Edmund said he had business in town. This was not entirely true. Eleanor knew this because she had been sitting across from him for 2 days and had learned, among other things, the specific quality of his voice when he was being precise and the specific quality when he was not. She understood why he said it. She understood why Richard let him say it without question. She walked with him to the door. She had not planned to walk further than the hall. She was at the top of the front steps before she understood that she had gone further than she intended. This had been happening more frequently where Edmund Ashworth was concerned, and she had not yet decided what to do about it. He turned on the step. They looked at each other. The Berkshire afternoon was cold and entirely clear, the kind of light that does not permit convenient vagueness.
Last night when I said I occasionally choose things nobody expected me to want, I meant more by that than what I said.
Eleanor did not move. He looked at her with the steadiness of someone who has decided to say a thing and is going to finish saying it.
I'm still aware that I have no standing. I have not forgotten it. You were engaged to my brother 6 days ago. I am the man who told you why. I have no standing to speak of anything beyond that.
He reached up and put on his hat.
I am also finding, every time I leave a room you're in, that I care less about that than I know I should. I thought you ought to know that I'm aware of the difference.
One more moment, then he walked down the steps and across the gravel and did not look back. Eleanor stood in the open doorway and watched him until the lane curved and the trees took him. She had not said anything. She was not certain this was a failure. She went back inside. Richard was in the study with the door closed, which was its own kind of generosity. She collected her papers and waited for the carriage. In the carriage, she did not take out the papers. She sat with her hands in her lap. The Berkshire lane ran past the window, the elms, the fields, the sky that had been sharp and cold all day and was now going amber at the edges, the tint of a winter afternoon that has decided to last longer than expected. She thought about what she had signed that morning, her father's name in a document she could not retrieve. The moment Edmund had said "you do not have to," and she had said "I know," and had signed anyway. She had not done this because anything was owed. She had not done it for Richard. She had understood this, in the moment of the pen on the page, with a completeness she had not bothered to argue with. She had spent the better part of a year learning the particular way a duke cleared his throat before speaking in company, and the pattern of dining room wallpaper, and the texture of a future she had been moving carefully toward. She had believed, not with certainty but with the reasonable confidence of someone who has done her work, that this was the one. 4 days beside a man who had found the same document clause from a different direction and had not needed to announce it. Who had a house in Wiltshire chosen on a road he happened to be on, who had carried coal to a room he had no obligation to because the footmen were at supper and she had been working since 5. Who had told her, on a Tuesday morning on a London doorstep, that he had no standing, and who had shown up on every relevant occasion since as though the question of standing had not yet been decided. She had not disagreed with him on Tuesday. She had not disagreed with him on Wednesday, or Thursday, or Saturday. She was sitting in a carriage on a Sunday afternoon in Berkshire, thinking that Wednesday was still some time away. There is a kind of person who will do the practical thing right up until the practical thing is finished. Who holds the problem, turns it over, works it from every angle, stays clear-headed and useful, while the thing that actually matters waits, with considerable patience, for them to look up. Eleanor Voss was not a sentimental woman. She was a woman who looked at things clearly, who did not permit herself to avoid what she could see. She could see this. Tell me something in the comments. Have you ever been the last person to understand what was actually happening? Not because you were not paying attention, but because you were paying attention to the wrong thing. I think about that kind of delayed clarity more than I probably should. Every comment helps this story reach the people who are looking for it.